Marcus, I think it's time we ended this.
Loud enough for every investor, every board member, every camera in the room to hear. You're a good man.
But you're ordinary.
And I didn't build an empire to stand next to ordinary. 300 guests froze. Champagne glasses stopped halfway to lips. Marcus Reed stood in the center of the room in the same tailored suit he'd worn to every one of her launches for the past 6 years, and he didn't flinch. "Say that again," he said quietly. "You heard me." Sabrina lifted her chin, the diamond on her finger catching the light. "This is my night, Marcus. My company. My name on that building outside. I won't let anything ordinary stand in the way of what I've built. Everyone in this room knows what I've contributed to this company," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the eyes on him. "You just decided tonight was the night to erase it in front of all of them." "I decided tonight was the night to stop pretending you're the reason for any of this," Sabrina said. "I built this. I earned every part of it." "You earned the work," Marcus said. "You didn't earn it alone, and you know that better than anyone in this room. But go ahead. Say whatever you need to say to feel like the only name that matters." Victor Kane stepped closer to Sabrina's side, saying nothing, his silence its own kind of statement. Sabrina looked at him, then back at Marcus, and something in her expression hardened into a decision she'd clearly already made before she ever picked up the microphone. The room started whispering before he even took the ring off. "Before this story goes any further, tell me where you're watching from tonight. I always love seeing how many cities and countries are part of this community, so drop your location in the comments before we continue." Marcus set the ring down on the nearest table without a word and walked out of the ballroom. He didn't look back once. 6 years earlier, Marcus Reed had been the only person in Sabrina Cole's life who believed she could build Cole Dynamics from a 2-person office into one of the fastest-growing tech firms in the city. He had money from an inheritance he never talked about, and he poured almost all of it into her first round of funding before anyone else would touch her. "You don't have to do this," Sabrina told him the night he wired the first transfer. "I want to," Marcus said. "I believe in you. That's enough for me." She kissed him that night like she meant it. For years, she probably did. He stayed in the background on purpose. Every press release credited private investors. Every interview, Sabrina answered questions about her vision, her drive, her genius, and never once mentioned the man who had signed the checks that made any of it possible. Marcus never asked her to. He told himself it didn't matter who got the credit, as long as she succeeded. The first real crack came 2 years in, during a magazine profile that ran a full page on Sabrina's self-made rise, without a single mention of outside funding. Marcus read it over breakfast, said nothing for a while, then finally set the magazine down. "They're calling you self-funded," he said. "It's a simplification," Sabrina said, not looking up from her laptop. "Readers don't want the fine print. They want the story. The fine print is that I mortgaged half of what my father left me to get you through your first 2 rounds. And I'm grateful," Sabrina said, finally meeting his eyes. "But if the story becomes she had help, every investor after this reads it as she needed help. That's not how this industry works, Marcus. You know that." "I'm not asking for a press release," he said. "I'm asking why it has to be a secret between us two." "It's not a secret. It's just not the headline." She reached across the table and took his hand. "You believe in me. That's worth more to me than any credit line in a magazine. Please don't make this into something it isn't." He let it go, the way he always did. He told himself belief didn't need to be visible to be real. "People will think I rode your coattails if they know," Sabrina said once early on. "I need this to be mine." "It is yours," Marcus said. "I'm just making sure you get the chance to prove it." She built the company into something real. Cole Dynamics went from a 2-person office to 400 employees in 5 years. Sabrina became the name every business magazine wanted on their cover. Renowned female CEO. Self-made visionary. The city's most influential 35-year-old, 3 years running. Marcus attended every gala standing one step behind her, holding her coat, holding her hand, never once asking for recognition. He proposed to her on the rooftop of the building she'd just leased for her new headquarters, And she said yes with tears in her eyes that looked, at the time, completely real. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," she told him that night. "You did it," Marcus said. "I just handed you the tools." For the first few years, it worked. Then Sabrina started attending different rooms. Board dinners Marcus wasn't invited to. Investor retreats where the guest list somehow never included him. She came home later. She talked more about Victor Kane, the chairman of the city's largest venture consortium, than she talked about anything else. "Victor thinks we should expand into Europe by next spring," she said one night, scrolling through her phone instead of looking at Marcus across the table. "What do you think?" Marcus asked. "I think Victor knows what he's talking about. He's built 3 companies bigger than mine." "You built yours from nothing," Marcus said. "That's not smaller. That's harder." She looked up at him, like he'd said something quaint. "Marcus, sometimes I think you don't understand the level I'm operating on now." He let it go. He always let it go. The pattern kept repeating. Victor Kane started showing up at more of Sabrina's events. Victor Kane started calling her directly instead of going through her assistant. Victor Kane started standing just a little too close in the photos that made it into the business pages, and Sabrina never once corrected the rumors that started circulating. One night, Marcus found Sabrina rehearsing a keynote speech in front of the bedroom mirror, reciting a version of the company's origin story that skipped over the first 2 years entirely. "You left out the beginning," he said from the doorway. "You left out the beginning," he said from the doorway. "I condensed it," Sabrina said, not turning around. "Nobody wants a 10-minute origin story before the numbers." "You didn't condense it. You erased it. There's a difference between condensing and rewriting." "It's my keynote, Marcus." She finally turned to face him. "I get to decide which parts of my story matter to the audience I'm speaking to." "I'm not asking to be in the keynote," he said. "I'm asking why every version of this story keeps shrinking the part where anyone else was involved at all." "Because investors don't fund stories about teams," Sabrina snapped. "They fund stories about visionaries. I can't sell 'a guy helped me' to a stadium of people deciding whether to bet on me." "You could sell the truth," Marcus said quietly. "You just don't want to." She didn't answer that. She turned back to the mirror and kept rehearsing. Marcus noticed. He said nothing, not because he didn't care, but because he had already begun quietly making decisions of his own. Decisions Sabrina knew nothing about because for 6 years, she had never once asked what he did with the rest of his money, or his time, or his mind. While she was building Cole Dynamics into a name people recognized, Marcus had been building something else entirely, under a name nobody would connect to him. He called it Ridgeline Capital, and it existed almost entirely behind closed doors, a quiet fund that bought early stakes in struggling companies, restructured them, and turned them into the kind of assets other investors fought over. He never told Sabrina about it. She never asked what he did all day while she was in board meetings. She assumed, and he let her assume, that he simply managed the money he'd already made. By the time Cole Dynamics was preparing for its public offering, the night that was supposed to be the biggest of Sabrina's career, Ridgeline Capital quietly held stakes in 4 of the 5 firms that were expected to serve as Cole Dynamics' primary institutional backers. Sabrina didn't know that either. Daniel Kwan had been the first person Marcus hired, 3 years earlier, when Ridgeline was nothing more than a name on a filing and a handful of small positions in undervalued firms. "You could put this money into Cole Dynamics directly," Daniel told him at the time. "Double down on what you already believe in." "I've already put everything I have into Cole Dynamics," Marcus said. "This is the part of me that exists outside of that. I want to build something with my own name on it, even if nobody ever sees the name. Nobody sees it because you've structured it that way on purpose." "For now," Marcus said. "I'm not trying to compete with her. I'm trying to make sure that if the day ever comes where I need to stand on my own, I'm not standing on nothing." Daniel had looked at him for a long moment. "You already think that day is coming." "I hope it isn't," Marcus said. "But I've learned not to build my entire life around hoping." 3 years later, standing in his own corner office with his own name quietly attached to more influence than most executives in the city would ever accumulate, Marcus understood he'd been right to build it anyway. The night of the IPO launch gala was supposed to be the crowning moment of everything she'd built. Marcus had known for weeks that something in her had shifted completely, that whatever gratitude she once felt toward him had curdled into something closer to embarrassment. He wasn't surprised when she chose that exact night, in front of every investor who mattered, to end things in front of an audience instead of privately, where it would have cost her nothing but honesty. "You're ordinary," she'd said, loud enough for Victor Kane to hear from across the room, loud enough for the cameras near the stage to catch every word. Marcus walked out that night and didn't call her. He didn't post anything. He didn't defend himself to a single reporter who reached out asking for a comment on the sudden, public split. He simply disappeared from the story entirely, the way he'd always been willing to disappear, except this time, it was permanent. For a few weeks, the tabloids ran the version Sabrina wanted them to run. Self-made CEO outgrows the ordinary man who once loved her. Rising star cuts ties with the past to focus on the future. Sabrina gave one interview, sitting beside Victor Kane, calling the breakup necessary growth. "Some people are meant to build empires," she said, smiling for the camera. "And some people are only ever meant to help build someone else's." Marcus watched the clip once. He didn't finish it. 3 months after the IPO, Cole Dynamics stock had climbed exactly as projected. Sabrina appeared on 4 magazine covers in a single quarter. Victor Kane started appearing at her side so consistently that engagement rumors began circulating before the ring was even public. Then, without warning, one of Cole Dynamics' primary institutional backers pulled out of a planned second-round investment. Then another. Then a third. The official statements cited internal portfolio restructuring. None of them mentioned that all 3 firms had recently sold controlling influence to a private fund called Ridgeline Capital, whose managing partner had quietly requested the reallocation months in advance. Sabrina's board called an emergency meeting. "We're down 11% in institutional confidence in 6 weeks, her CFO told her, sliding a report across the table. "Someone is moving pieces we don't have visibility into." "Who has that kind of reach?" Sabrina asked. "I don't know," her CFO said. "But whoever it is, they're patient. This isn't a hostile move. It's a slow one, which is worse because it means they're not trying to scare us. They're trying to outlast us." "Pull every filing connected to Ridgeline," Sabrina said. "I want to know who's behind that name by end of week." "We've tried. Their structure is airtight. Whoever built it knew exactly what they were protecting against." Nobody at the table had an answer. Nobody at the table knew that Ridgeline Capital had spent 5 years quietly acquiring the exact kind of reach that made a question like that impossible to answer honestly. Later that week, 2 junior employees passed Sabrina's office without realizing her door was open. "Did you hear the board's talking about a leadership review?" one asked. "After everything she built? That's insane." "It's not about what she built," the first one said. "It's about the fact that nobody can explain what's happening to the funding pipeline. People are saying it started right after she ended things with her fiancé. Publicly. On stage. You think that's connected? I think rich people don't forget things like that." Sabrina closed her door quietly and sat back down at her desk. Sabrina called Victor Kane that night, expecting reassurance. "I've heard the name Ridgeline mentioned a few times," Victor admitted. "Nobody knows who's actually behind it. It's privately held. No public filings beyond the minimum." "Find out," Sabrina said. "I'm trying," Victor said. "Whoever it is, they've been careful for a long time." Marcus, meanwhile, had stopped thinking about Sabrina almost entirely. Ridgeline Capital had grown into something that consumed every hour of his attention, and for the first time in 6 years, that felt like enough. He wasn't chasing revenge. He built the fund years before the breakup, quietly, patiently, the same way he'd once quietly funded a 2-person startup because he believed in something before anyone else did. The difference was this time, nobody was going to stand at a podium one day and call it ordinary. 6 months after the gala, Cole Dynamics missed its second quarter earnings target for the first time in its history. The stock dropped 14% in a single day. Analysts started asking pointed questions about leadership stability. Victor Kane, sensing the shift, began distancing himself in small, calculated ways. Fewer public appearances together, a canceled dinner, a statement to the press describing their relationship as still evolving. Sabrina sat alone in her office long after her staff had gone home, staring at a screen full of numbers that used to make sense to her. Her assistant knocked once. "There's someone here to see you. He says it's about the board's restructuring vote next week." "I don't have meetings scheduled tonight. He said you'd want to make an exception." The man who walked into her office wasn't Victor Kane. It was someone she'd never met, wearing a suit that cost more than her entire first funding round, carrying a single folder under his arm. "Ms. Cole," he said, "I represent Ridgeline Capital. My name is Daniel Kwan. I handle communications for our managing partner." "I've been trying to find out who runs Ridgeline for 6 months," Sabrina said. "Nobody would give me a name." "That's by design," Daniel said. "But given the vote next week, my partner felt it was time for a direct conversation. Ridgeline currently holds enough combined influence across your remaining institutional backers to significantly affect the board's decision on your continued leadership." Sabrina's stomach turned. "You're here to push me out." "I'm here to deliver a message," Daniel said, sliding the folder across her desk. "My partner would like to meet you in person before the vote. Tomorrow morning, his office." Sabrina barely slept that night. She'd spent 6 years building a name for herself, and somewhere in the last 6 months, a stranger she couldn't identify had quietly assembled enough leverage to end it with a single vote. She told herself she'd walk into that meeting and negotiate, the same way she'd negotiated every deal that had ever threatened her company. She told herself whoever was behind Ridgeline Capital was simply another investor who could be managed, flattered, outmaneuvered. She was still telling herself that when she stepped off the elevator the next morning into a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire skyline and found Marcus Reed standing at the window with his back to her. "You," she said, the word barely making it out of her throat. Marcus turned around slowly. "Sabrina, this is your fund. Ridgeline is yours." "It's been mine for 5 years," Marcus said. "Longer than you and I were together, technically. I started it before you ever proposed the second funding round for Cole Dynamics." "You never told me." "You never asked," Marcus said. "You never once asked what I did with the money after I gave it to you. You assumed I sat at home managing an inheritance. I let you assume that because it was easier than explaining something you'd already decided wasn't important." Sabrina sat down slowly across from his desk, though he hadn't offered her the chair. "So, this is revenge?" "No," Marcus said. "This is a fund I built because I'm good at exactly the thing you told a room full of investors I wasn't capable of. You called me ordinary in front of everyone who mattered to you. I walked out of that room and went back to building something you never bothered to notice I was already building." "The board vote next week," Sabrina said. "It's about my position as CEO." "It is. You control enough influence to swing it." "I do. Are you going to?" Marcus sat down across from her, unhurried. "I haven't decided yet. That's actually part of why I asked you here." Sabrina's hands were shaking, though she tried to hide it beneath the desk. "What do you want, Marcus?" "I want you to understand something," he said. "You spent 6 years believing that ambition and worth were the same thing, that the only people who mattered were the ones standing in the spotlight. You built an entire identity on being the one who rises, and you decided a long time ago that meant surrounding yourself with people who looked like winners and discarding anyone who didn't fit that picture cleanly enough. That's not fair. You called me ordinary in front of 300 people," Marcus said. "On the night I'd quietly helped make possible, one more time, without you even knowing it. Cole Dynamics' original credit facility 5 years ago came through a firm I'd already begun advising. I've been in rooms adjacent to your success longer than you've known me. You just never once thought to wonder how someone ordinary kept ending up exactly where your company needed him to be." Sabrina said nothing. "I'm not here to destroy Cole Dynamics," Marcus continued. "I built the version of myself that could sit in this office because I refused to let one moment define what I was capable of. But I'm also not going to pretend the last 6 months haven't happened. The vote will go the way the board decides it should go. I won't manufacture an outcome out of anger. But I also won't pretend the version of you that stood on that stage 6 months ago earned my protection anymore." "So you're just going to watch," Sabrina said quietly. I'm going to let the people who actually built this company decide who leads it next, Marcus said. The same way I once let you decide who got credit for what I built for you. Funny how that feels from the other side. You could have told me, Sabrina said. Any time in the last 5 years. You could have said, Sabrina, I'm building something of my own. Why didn't you? Because every time I brought up wanting to be seen for what I contributed, you told me it wasn't the right time, or it would complicate the story, or investors wouldn't understand it, Marcus said. So, I stopped bringing it up to you. I just kept building it anyway, quietly, the same way you taught me to be comfortable being quiet about my own worth. That's not fair. It's not supposed to be fair, Marcus said. It's supposed to be honest. You wanted a version of me that stayed in the background and never asked for anything in return. I gave you that version for 6 years. I just didn't stop existing outside of it. A man can spend years handing someone else the credit and still, quietly, without telling a soul, be building the exact thing that eventually proves he was never small to begin with. Sabrina sat in silence for a long moment. What happens now? Now you go back to your office and wait for the board's decision like everyone else, Marcus said. The same way I waited for years to see if you'd ever decide I was worth more than convenient. The board vote took place the following Thursday. Sabrina retained her position as CEO by a narrow margin, largely because 2 of Ridgeline's associated backers abstained rather than vote against her outright, a decision Marcus had specifically requested, though he never told her that and never would. You had the votes to remove her entirely, Daniel said, reviewing the final tally in Marcus's office the morning after. Why hold back? Because if I use everything I built just to end her career, then all of this was never about building something of my own, Marcus said. It becomes about her again. I didn't spend 3 years constructing Ridgeline, so I could spend 1 week making it about revenge. Some people would call that mercy. Some people would call it the only way I get to keep the version of myself I actually respect, Marcus said. She gets to keep her title. I get to keep knowing exactly what I'm capable of without needing her to lose everything to prove it. He hadn't wanted her destroyed. He'd wanted her to understand exactly how much of her rise had never belonged to her alone, and exactly how easily it could have ended differently. Victor Kane quietly ended things with her 2 weeks later, citing diverging priorities. Though everyone who read between the lines understood he'd simply calculated that her position was no longer the guaranteed ascent he'd once assumed it was. You're still the CEO, Sabrina said when he told her, sitting across from him in a restaurant that suddenly felt too quiet. The vote went in my favor. Barely, Victor said. And barely isn't the same thing as secure. I built my career on backing certainties, Sabrina. Right now, you're not one. 6 months ago, you told the press we were evolving. 6 months ago, nobody knew Ridgeline Capital existed, Victor said. Now everyone in this industry is asking who's really controlling the strings behind your company, and the answer isn't you. I can't build my next decade around someone whose foundation turned out to be borrowed the entire time. That's all I am to you? A calculation. That's all any of us are to each other in this industry, Victor said, standing to leave. You taught me that yourself, the first year I knew you. I just didn't expect to be the one applying the lesson to you. He left cash on the table for a meal neither of them had touched and walked out without looking back, the same easy exit Sabrina had once made look effortless. She sat alone at the table for a long time afterward, replaying a version of the ballroom night in her head, except this time, she was the one standing under the lights while someone else walked away, without a trace of regret. 6 months after that, at an industry summit neither of them had expected the other to attend, Sabrina found herself standing near the same kind of ballroom stage where she'd once ended things with a microphone in her hand. Marcus was 2 tables away, deep in conversation with 3 investors whose names carried more weight in that room than her own. She approached him during the break, alone, without cameras, without an audience. I owe you an apology, she said. I don't know if it means anything at this point. It means something, Marcus said. It just doesn't change anything. I know, Sabrina said. I just needed you to hear it. I built my entire identity around being the one who rises, and I decided that meant tearing down anyone who didn't rise as visibly as I wanted them to. You never once needed the spotlight to be worth something. I did. And it cost me the one person who actually believed in me before I believed in myself. Do you know what the strangest part of all this is? Marcus asked. I never once needed you to give me credit. I needed you to believe I was capable of more than being useful. There's a difference. You can thank someone for their money without ever once wondering what else they might be capable of building. That's what happened between us. You valued what I gave you. You never once valued what I might become. I see it now, Sabrina said. I don't know if that matters. It matters to you, Marcus said. That's probably enough for whatever you do next. It just isn't enough to bring back 6 years of being treated like the background of your own story. Is there anything I could say that would change how you see me? Marcus considered the question honestly, the way he considered most things. Maybe, eventually. But it wouldn't happen tonight, and it wouldn't happen because of an apology at a conference between sessions. It would take you actually becoming someone who credits the people who helped build what you have consistently when there's nothing left to gain from it. I don't know if you're capable of that yet. I hope you are. I'm just not going to wait around to find out. For what it's worth, Sabrina said, I don't think I ever stopped respecting you. I think I convinced myself respect and usefulness could be separated and treated you accordingly. I know now they can't be. Not if the respect is real. That might be the most honest thing you've said to me since the night you proposed a toast to the vision behind Cole Dynamics and never once looked at me while you said it, Marcus said. I noticed that night. I noticed a lot of nights like it. I just kept telling myself it didn't matter as long as the company succeeded. It mattered. It just took me longer than it should have to admit that to myself. By the time I finally did, I'd already stopped waiting for you to be the one who admitted it too. Marcus studied her for a long moment. I hope you figure out how to separate those two things eventually. Ambition and worth were never the same thing. I just don't think I'm the person who should be the one to help you learn that anymore. He returned to his table, without another word. Sabrina stood alone near the stage, the same way he once had, watching someone else's name get called for the evening's keynote, not hers, not this time. She thought about the ballroom 6 months earlier, the microphone still warm in her hand, the word ordinary leaving her mouth like it cost her nothing. It had cost her everything. She just hadn't known the price yet when she said it. Some leaders step down without ever losing their title. They simply stop being the ones the room turns to when it matters. And some people the world once called ordinary turn out to be the only ones who were ever actually building something meant to last. In the weeks that followed, Marcus never once brought Sabrina up in interviews, never once used Ridgeline's growing reputation to comment on Cole Dynamics or the woman who had once called him ordinary in front of everyone who mattered to her. He simply kept building, the same quiet way he always had, except now the name on the door was finally his own. Daniel asked him once, months later, whether he ever regretted staying silent for so long about what he was capable of. No, Marcus said. I regret staying silent about what I deserved. Those aren't the same thing. I always knew what I was capable of. I just spent 6 years letting someone else decide whether that was worth acknowledging out loud. I don't do that anymore. What changed? I stopped needing her permission to know my own worth, Marcus said. That's the only thing that ever needed to change. So tell me, do you think Sabrina deserves a second chance? Or did she lose the right to win the night she chose an audience over the person who never needed one? Let me know in the comments. And before you go, tell me one more time where you're watching from tonight. I love seeing this community stretch across the entire world one story at a time. If this one kept you hooked until the very end, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.